What's up guys, my name is Ace, and in today's video I wanted to revisit aiming stability in Modern Warfare, more specifically how aiming stability interacts with recoil in this game. Now this is something that's been requested from me many times in the past, and every time it's been requested I've dabbled with it a little bit, done some testing on my own, and basically concluded that it doesn't have a significant impact on your recoil. Basically, when looking at the recoil between a gun that had minimized aiming stability versus maximized aiming stability, the overall magnitude of the recoil was always the same, assuming I wasn't also using attachments that would directly impact the recoil. But yeah, the magnitude was about the same, and there's always some randomness when it comes to recoil patterns, so I didn't really notice any trends that were worth making a video about, at least when testing aiming stability. On top of that, in previous Call of Duty games like Black Ops 4 for instance, I have done the testing with aiming stability or idle sway, and it turns out in those games, the moment you start firing a gun, your idle sway stops. It doesn't continue as you're firing, so therefore it doesn't affect your recoil pattern. However, a little while back, the guys over at truegamedata.com, they did some more detailed testing with aiming stability, and they actually managed to find some trends here, and I basically just wanted to share those results with you guys today. Of course, I will leave their original video link down below, as well as their website, which I'm sure many of you guys are already aware of. They have an amazing website with very detailed stats on the guns there, if you guys want to check that out. But I'm basically just going to do the exact same tests that they did on their video to spread the word on this and show you guys how this works. Because it turns out aiming stability can have an impact on your recoil pattern, just not so much your total magnitude of recoil. So taking a look at the test here, we've got the Bruin, and I've got a bunch of attachments on here that reduce your aiming stability, so it creates more idle sway while aiming down sight. And you can see while aiming down sight here, you tend to sway basically straight side to side. And what I'm going to do is my first recoil pattern, I'm going to start shooting when my sway is at the leftmost point. And you can see the recoil pattern going up here, pretty straightforward, nothing too surprising there, looks like a Bruin recoil pattern. Now I want to do the same test, and I'm going to adjust my aim over a little bit so that I start firing when the idle sway is at the rightmost point, and the first bullet will start in the same bullet hole as the previous recoil. And as you can see here, while we still have the same magnitude of recoil as the previous test, obviously we've got the same attachments on there anyways, you'll notice that it does follow a slightly different path. And this means you would have to compensate for that recoil a little bit differently in a gunfight. And I want to point out that this is something that is easily repeatable. This isn't just a one-off result. It's not just randomness and I happen to get this result. I can do this same test over and over and over again, and truegamedata.com also did this test over and over and over again. And you get the same sort of result, with of course, there's always a little bit of randomness, but the overall path of the recoil does the same thing. So the fact that this is repeatable consistently shows that aiming stability, unlike previous Call of Duty games, doesn't turn off when you start firing. Your gun will still sway side to side with aiming stability while also kicking up from the recoil. Additionally, taking this a step further, just like truegamedata.com did, now I want to show you the Bruin, but this time I put several attachments on there to give you basically zero idle sway. And the attachment selection here was very deliberate so that the recoil control and recoil stabilization stats should be 100% equal between these two. So for example, I stuck with the no stock attachment still on this build, even though it harms your aiming stability, just to make sure that that recoil control stat stays the same, because it also affects recoil control and we want things to be consistent here. And with this, I was able to add enough attachments that help with aiming stability to effectively still eliminate any of that sway while aiming down sight. And with this, once again, we see a pretty standard recoil pattern. On its own, I wouldn't really notice much of a difference here. It's a pretty normal recoil pattern for the Bruin. The key here, though, is my next recoil pattern, starting in the exact same hole, follows the exact same path. And you can do this over and over and over again, and the general path of recoil will be exactly the same every single time with this setup. Yes, you will get the odd bullet that bounces a little bit and deviates from that path slightly, but that's just due to how recoil works. The main thing to point out here is this really does confirm that aiming stability doesn't shut off while you're firing your gun, and therefore if you have a gun with very low aiming stability and lots of idle sway, that is going to have an impact on your recoil pattern. Not your recoil magnitude, just your recoil pattern. Now, truegamedata also did a few tests with semi-autos. I'm not going to show those tests just because I don't want to straight up copy every little detail from their video, and I do want to encourage you to actually go and check that out because they do really good work over there and they spend a ton of time and they deserve credit for that. But there's a really interesting result he got with the SKS that I want you guys to check out, so please click his video down below and go and check that out. But before you do that, I just wanted to share my overall thoughts on this and how important I feel aiming stability is now that we know this. Basically, a big thing to point out with these tests is these were kind of the max and the min. So we had really severely reduced aiming stability with our first tests, and that's not something that I would consider to be a very realistic build that many people would ever use, especially in something like Warzone. On top of that, even with that severely reduced aiming stability, I don't feel like I would have that much of an issue controlling that recoil. Like I said, the overall magnitude of the recoil is still going to be pretty much the same. All it would take is a bit more adjustment on the fly, and it would mean you can't rely quite as much on muscle memory. You have to actually adjust on the fly. So realistically speaking, this is kind of my conclusion and my opinion on these results. As long as you aren't reducing your aiming stability severely with guns, I don't feel this is generally going to be an issue. I still strongly encourage, especially in Warzone, using attachments like the tac laser, for instance, which basically eliminates any sort of that idle sway, so you have perfect aiming stability. I still strongly encourage that, and I use that on so many of my classes just because it has so many other benefits as well. But the main takeaway for me here is this is more of a reminder that you don't want to be reducing your aiming stability too much, but it's not a stat that should be on the top of your list of importance when creating a class setup. I still feel like aim down sight time and actual recoil control and stabilization are much more important stats to worry about than aiming stability. This is just one extra little consideration that you should be taking, especially with your longer range builds. If you're going to be using an LMG or an assault rifle for longer ranges, then yeah, this is something where you really have to make sure you're not reducing your aiming stability at least. Aside from that though, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But of course, those are just my opinions based on the results of this. I'd like to know in the comments section below. First up, what did you guys think about the results of aiming stability as it relates to recoil? Were you surprised to see that it can actually impact the path that your recoil ends up taking? And also, knowing this, is this going to have an impact on how you create your classes? Are you going to be switching around a few attachments now that you know this? Or are you pretty much still set and happy with what you've got? Just let me know those thoughts down below. And also, big reminder, make sure you check out truegamedata.com, especially the end of their video that I have linked down below, because that's where he looks at the SKS with high and low aiming stability, and the results there are quite significant. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys enjoyed this video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.